Friends, Jordan Montgomery here, and we're glad that you've tuned into another episode of the Growth Over Goals podcast. Before we jump into today's conversation, we want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Thompson & Co. Salon and Parlor. Thompson & Co. Salon and Parlor is a family-owned, stylist-owned community salon that fits the needs for all types of families. Located in downtown Iowa City and now a second location in Coralville, North Liberty area, TCO specializes in all things hair. In fact, that's where I've been getting my hair done for the last 7 years. TCO specializes in hair cutting, razor cutting, the most modern color techniques, and high-end hair extensions. As one of Iowa's only intercoiffure salons and Salon Today's top 200 salons in the U.S., TCO looks forward to being the salon of choice for you and those you love. Be sure to call or book on their website today at thompsonandcosalon.com. Thank you, TCO, for all you do for us and our community. Welcome back to the Growth Over Goals podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Montgomery, and this is a highly anticipated conversation on my end. You're getting to sit down with us today and listen to truly one of the top minds in the leadership space. This individual has a faith background, has been leading at a high level for such a long time, but I would tell you what I really admire about today's guest is this person could lead in faith circles, could lead in corporate circles, long-standing tradition of leading, impacting, and changing lives. Matter of fact, this individual has as much leadership experience as anyone we ever interviewed on the Growth Over Goals podcast. Let me tell you a little bit today about our guest, David Ashcraft. David Ashcraft served as a senior pastor at LCBC Church for 32 years. Under his leadership, check this out, LCBC grew from one location with a weekly attendance of 150 people to 19 locations across Pennsylvania with a combined weekly average attendance of over 25,000. What I love about David is he has a humble heart for the Lord. He's quick to give God the credit. God continues to expand his territory, increase his influence. Today, he leads The Advantage, an organization really designed to help serve and develop leaders. He's also president and CEO of the Global Leadership Network. So many of you are familiar with GLN, or you've attended or participated, or you've watched the Global Leadership Summit, which takes place next week. So if you're catching this episode, know this, we're a week away from one of the premier leadership events in the world. And it happens with David and his team leading the way. So David and his wife, Ruth, currently live in Pennsylvania. They have 2 grown adult children, 2 grandchildren. It is my sincere honor to welcome today's guest, David Ashcraft, to the show. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Jordan, thank you for the opportunity. It's an honor to be with you. And I think from your introduction, all that means is I'm old. I've had lots of experience and time to lead. So, but thank you. You're kind.
Well, you have led in so many different ways in different circles. And I really commend you, David, on stepping out into new circles after long periods of time, having great success and great impact. And you're going to talk a little bit today about some of those transitions and inspire all of us. But I want to go back to the early days of your leadership journey. You talk about some of the storms that you went through, and we have some young leaders listening, some emerging leaders, David, that are dealing with some storms. We also have some senior leaders who are dealing with storms, but you kind of talk about the early days of your leadership journey, these storms that you were in, and how you decided to sort of stay in the storm and how God blessed your path as a result. Can you take us back to the early days of your leadership journey?
Yeah, Jordan, it's funny you talk about storms because they definitely happen to all of us when we're involved in leadership. And so for me, definitely when I came into LCBC stands for Lives Changed by Christ. And that's who we are. We said we're just a community of people whose lives have been and continue to be changed by Jesus Christ. But in those early years, lots of opposition to the ideas that we had as far as leading. I was the senior pastor. It's funny they called me the senior pastor. I was the only pastor. I was the only staff person back then. And so people that didn't like the style of music we were using, people didn't like the way we dressed, they wanted formality, they wanted the traditional hymns and organ and piano kind of thing. And so as we began to make changes, a lot of opposition that way. And early on, I was a John Maxwell fan back in the early 90s. He was still pastoring at that point. So this is before he made some of his transitions. And I would listen to John, and he would just say most pastors, the mistake they make is they'll be in the midst of a storm, and what they don't realize is they're right on the edge of that storm finishing, but they'll bail out. And had they just stuck around a little bit longer, then the clouds would have swept away, and they would have had just a whole different season for their leadership. And so I made a commitment when I came to LCBC. I just said, God, I'm not going to go out looking for other positions. I'm going to stay, and if you want to move me, you're going to have to move me, but I'm not going to go looking. And so that was kind of the start of that whole process.
Well, obviously, God honors that path because LCBC grows tremendously. And as we know, there's challenges with extreme and tremendous growth, and you certainly experienced that. So I'm curious, what were some of the early learnings? And then how did those learnings or how did those challenges shift as you continued to grow LCBC with the team around you?
So one of my earliest learnings just about storms and getting through storms actually take me back to my grad school days. And I was attending Dallas Theological Seminary, studying theology and the Bible. Part of the Dallas program was you had to take 3 years of Greek and 2 years of Hebrew. They wanted you to learn the Greek and Hebrew languages. And I was in the midst of my second year of those languages, and I was just drowning, Jordan. I kind of came to the conclusion, this is not me. I don't have a clue what I'm doing. I'm not enjoying it. And so I was ready to bail out and quit. And I went and talked to one of my professors. His name was Dr. Charles Ryrie. And I went to his house on a Wednesday night, and I can still remember sitting in his living room explaining to him why this wasn't the course for my life, why I needed to bail out. And he was very patient with me and very kind with me. And he just listened to me talk. And after I finished complaining for who knows how long, he just said, you know what, David, if you need to drop out, if you need to step out of this program, he said, that's fine. But he said, wait till you get to the end of the semester. Never stop in the midst of the storm. And so he said, get through the storm and get through the semester. And then at the end of the semester, if you still feel like the right decision for you is to drop out, then you can make the decision then. And so I went ahead and fought it out that semester. Somehow I got through both the Greek and Hebrew classes and passed, and decided at that point, let's go ahead and stick it out. Let's not drop out, but let's go ahead and finish the program. And Jordan, I'm so thankful that I didn't drop out at that point, because who knows what doors would have or would not have opened for me had I not finished that program. And so that's become a life lesson for me of whenever I find myself in the midst of a real hard time, of just saying, okay, get through the storm. And then if I need to make a change, then make it then, but at least get through the storm. And what I watch people do is they get in the midst of the storm and they're ready to bail. And who knows, had they waited just a little bit longer, what a difference it would have made.
Well, clearly the steadfast, faithfulness that you displayed and showed, and the way that God, I'm assuming, also drew near to you in the middle of that storm, created this unbelievable impact. And you do kind of go back to it, right, and say, man, what would have my life looked like, or what would my ministry have looked like? And we know that God is faithful regardless, but it could have changed the way that your life unfolded. And so there's a leader listening today who needed to hear that, David. So thanks for just the message of hope, when you're in the storm. We also know that God does his best work in seasons of challenge and difficulty. I love the scripture in James, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. For the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And so I'm so encouraged to hear that you stuck it out in the storm, and that God did amazing things with your life as a result.
And Jordan, I think our temptation in the midst of a storm, in the midst of a difficult time, is to think, I just need to change my circumstances. If I could change the circumstances I'm in, things will be better. And I guess what I've come to realize is God may want to change our circumstances, but what he may want more is to change us. And so yes. I try to, as much as I can, and again, it's hard when you're in the midst of a storm, to stop and think about what's going on, but try to think, okay, how is God trying to change me? What's he preparing in me for the future? And so rather than trying to change my circumstances right away, figure out, okay, what needs to change in me? And maybe it's persistence, maybe it's patience, maybe who knows what it is, tenacity. But I do look and think, okay, had I not stuck it out, who knows where my life would have gone? And then I will say too, Jordan, I think there's something for longevity in a role. And I totally understand in a lot of corporate settings and even in the church world, the temptation is to think, I've got to keep taking stair steps and moving up and moving up. And so pastor of a church of 200 is looking at that church of 4 or 6 or 800, and you kind of keep stepping up. And I understand that for some people that may be the right path. For me, It was, you know what, I'm just going to stay. And if God wants to move me, then he'll move me. And I'm so glad that he didn't. And there were some opportunities when LCBC was a church of 700-800 people where I could have made some changes that what at that time felt like a bigger deal, but they pale in comparison to the church that LCBC became down the road. But it took time to do that.
Yeah. That's such great advice, David. This idea of, God doing something in you before he does something with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times we just want him to do something with us without really evaluating what he's doing in us. I heard our pastor the other day say, instead of asking the question, what are you waiting for? How about you ask the question, who am I waiting on?
Mm-hmm.
And that's been helpful for me just to remember in moments of trial or transition that, hey, my responsibility is to lean into the Lord and what he's doing in my life and stay close to him and be in his word. And it's amazing how over time, if you stay close to him, so many of our circumstances get worked out. But to your point, we get developed and in some really surreal and unique ways.
Hey, Jordan, I'll also say real quick, so often in the circumstances we're facing or the storms we're facing, it comes down to people issues, relational issues. And I can almost go back every single time. And it wasn't so much that the structure was the problem. It was just people relationships. And so in my early years at LCBC, there was a man named Abe, and Abe was against everything I did. And so every Sunday he would write a note after the message telling me all the things that I was doing wrong. 3 years into my time at LCBC, we were having a congregational meeting. Everybody showed up then because there were always fireworks. We were going to hire our first staff member. And so there's maybe 100 people in the room. We were still small at that time, talking about hiring this first staff person besides myself. At some point, Abe stands up in the meeting. He says, why would we hire anybody? Nobody could work with David. And it was just that contentious kind of relationship with Abe. And Abe eventually, several years later, ended up leaving. But it's so often it's just figuring out how to work with difficult people and deciding, am I bigger than that person? Are they bigger than me? Am I going to let them run my life? Or am I going to trust God to say, God, you take care of Abe. I'm going to keep going the course you've given me to go. And so it's just, it's fascinating how so often it's our emotions, it's the relationships that are the issue more than anything else.
I'm so glad you bring up Abe, because someone is thinking, I have an Abe in my life. There's an Abe, David, and he or she is unfair and unreasonable, and they're preventing me from my opportunity, or they're holding me back. And what do I do? How would you just address our audience today on dealing with an Abe? And what's the practical application of how you kind of deal with those people? In broader terms, obviously every situation can be a bit different, but any practical advice for people listening on dealing with a Abe type character in their own life?
Jordan, I think, so again, this is easier to talk about than actually to live out. So I'll say that right away.
Sure.
For me, it was to say, okay, I can't control Abe and the things that he's doing, but I can control myself. And so I can make sure that I respond in a healthy, mature way, in a way that's going to be pleasing to God. I can make sure that I don't let him drive the decisions that I'm making. And I definitely have to think about Abe and what he's saying. Is there any truth to it? I think so often we write them off right away and assume they're just a fool. And so let's disregard what they say. But trying to say, is there any truth to what he's saying? And then not allowing him to take me off course and what's going on. Also made me very aware of who else was around me. And so if Abe was the only opinion that was negative towards certain things, then that was a big indicator to me that, okay, maybe he's off, everybody else is on. And so it's just, trying to sort through and not just get so focused on Abe. And so often what we do is somebody like Abe is in our face, and all we can do is see Abe when we've got this whole crowd of people back here that I can't see because Abe is so in my face. And so just saying, be careful. Don't let Abe run your life for you. And Henry Cloud is somebody that we have as a speaker at the Global Leadership Summit from time to time. And he talked once about, you've got people that are, you've got wise people, you've got foolish people, and you've got evil people in your life, and trying to differentiate between, okay, this is a wise person, I want to listen to what they say. Here's a fool, and I'm not going to give them a whole lot of time. But then here's an evil person that really is destructive. I need to handle each three differently. And so just being aware of who they are and how much attention you give to them, I think is real key.
Sage advice. And I'm only imagining, David, how many Abes you've run into over the course of your years. I know I've run into several just in my short, leadership journey. And I think it is important to be able to discern wise, foolish, evil, also be gracious, but continue to stay focused on what's most important. Love the picture you just painted of this person being right in your face and you're unable to see the crowd of people maybe behind them that God is really calling you to or asking you to lead and impact.
Jordan, the other thing I'll just say about people real quick too, Ruth, my wife, and I will all the time, as we're struggling with a particular individual, we'll just say, because oftentimes what we're worried about is, does everybody else see this person in the same light that I do? Is everybody else listening to this person more than I think they should? And Ruth and I will always come to the conclusion, it's not that we're that bright or that smart or that intuitive about this person. And so we'll say, if we see it, everybody else sees it too. And so that's where I just need to rise above this person. Everybody else knows what they're like. And so they're going to discount them if they need to be discounted. And so just trying to keep things in perspective and balance.
Well, I feel like we need to tag this conversation dealing with difficult people and then just go another hour. I sort of had it tagged as, staying faithful, but great insights on dealing with difficult people. And I think, to your point, David, if you're going to lead and if you want to have any kind of longevity, I think this is something you really have to figure out. Your leadership journey is, how are you going to deal with those who oppose you or persecute you or are unfair in how they deal with you? So I know we could go really deep in that lane. We might have to bring you back for another episode if you're willing. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges as the church grew. So, 19 locations, 25,000 people are coming to the church every week to hear the good news and to be impacted. And you got to lead those people. That's a tremendous challenge. I mean, again, this has become, LCBC, one of the largest churches in the country, certainly in the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, you're doing things on a broad scale. Now there's a whole new set of challenges. We're skipping over some good years here, David, but take us to kind of that final, 10 or 15 years at LCBC. What were some of the challenges that you faced? And then again, how did your leadership change as a result?
Yeah. So, the whole thing of adding locations really came out of circumstances that were confining us. And so we had grown in our original location to about 8,000 people. LCBC is located in central Pennsylvania, Lancaster County. It's farming country. The town that we're in is only about 5,000 people. And so we had 8,000 people coming to the church, driving from 45 minutes to an hour away to come to this location. And the township around us finally said, you can't grow anymore. We're done. You can't expand your facilities. You're taking up too much farmland, and the people here fight to preserve their farmland. And so we had a dilemma, and we had to figure out, are we done? Have we introduced everybody that God wants us to introduce to Jesus, or are we not finished yet? So we began to look around the country and began to see this whole thing called multi-site was just taking off at the time. And we thought we could do this. And so we laid out a plan of 5 locations around us and started working that plan. Never would have done that had we not been constrained by the township. And so we would have just kept growing bigger in that one location. And so what we were so upset at that time, the township trying to restrict us, now we look back and say what a gift that was, because we've been able to grow much, much larger. And so we've got many more people at other locations now coming to LCBC than we do at our main location. So sometimes looking at those constraints and realizing that's what causes us to be creative. That's what causes us to do things differently. And so the changes really, with any organization, what's talked about in churches is that just because you're a church of 25 people is very different than a church of 250 people, which is very different than a church of 2,500 people, which is different than a church of 25,000 people. And so there's a guy, Carl George, back in the 80s and 90s, there was kind of a church growth guru. And he would often talk about churches like animals. And it'd say, you've got all different kinds of animals. You've got a mouse, you've got a cat, you've got a dog, you've got a horse. They're all animals, but they're very different animals. And he would look at churches, but I think you could apply this to any organization and say an organization or a church of 25 people is different than a church of 500 to 5,000 to 25,000. So what we had to understand as we were growing as a church is we're not just getting bigger, we're changing animals. And we've gone from acting like a cat to a dog to a horse. And I think the mistake that a lot of organizations make, Jordan, and a lot of churches make is we're just a bigger church. And so let's keep doing it the way we've been doing it. And we're just bigger. And the reality is you're not just bigger. You're a whole different animal, and you've got to operate differently. You've got to structure differently and lead differently each one of those changes in animals or sizes.
David, who did you kind of lean on in that process? Because I'm just imagining this sort of small town guy who stewarded this calling. This grows, I'm assuming, also bigger than you maybe thought it would grow. Who do you start to get advice from? Who were you surrounding yourself with? Like, how did you know how to steward this well and how to lead well with this kind of extreme growth and change?
So, I constantly tell pastors even today, find a church that's twice as big as you, go to school on that church and find out what are they doing differently than you. So if you're 200, and we did this at 200, actually the very first conference Jordan and I ever took our elders to, I'd been at LCBC for 3 months and we were 150 people. We went to Philadelphia for a conference of breaking the 200 barrier and how to grow beyond 200. Once we got beyond 200, we started looking at churches of 400 people and saying, what does it look like to be 400? And we still do that today and say, what does it look like to be a church of 40, 50, 60,000 people? And so it's just saying, how do they operate differently? How do they structure differently? What systems do they have in place? What staff do they have in place? And they would say, just start acting that way and staffing yourself that way, systematizing yourself that way. And sometimes people would say, well, that's presumptuous that God's going to take you from 200 to 400 or 400 to 800. And I would always say it may be presumptuous, but really what I thought more of is if God wants 800 people, but we didn't prepare ourselves or we didn't plan or position ourselves to be that, how awful it would be to think that I kept us from getting to 800 people just because I didn't plan for it. And so we constantly were looking at that next stage. So early years, there was other churches. We would go to Willow Creek when we were real small as a church. Willow Creek at that time was 10 or 12,000 people. And we would just dream and look and be blown away. And we'd come back inspired, we'd come back depressed because we'd think, well, sure, if we had their money, their people, then we could do all of that. But it really inspired us to something bigger. So constantly looking at others and trying to learn from others. And even as we got bigger, it was sitting down with Chick-fil-A executives and listening to them talk about their goal isn't to get people into their stores. Their goal is to get chicken to the people, they kept saying. And as we listened to them talk, we said, okay, our goal isn't to get people into our church buildings. Our goal is to get Jesus to the people. And so that began to shape us some. And we walked away from that saying, okay, it doesn't matter that LCBC's name is on the side of a building. What matters is that building or the people in that building getting Jesus to the people. And so that caused us to start working with other churches and saying, how can we help other churches be more effective at getting Jesus to the people? So just constantly learning from others, business community, church community, wherever, to keep moving forward as an organization.
It's dynamite advice in just organizational health. Get around an organization that's 2 times as big as you and start to learn and ask questions and absorb and observe. I think if you're going to change how you think, you have to change who you're with. And so often we forget to do that, to expand, our circle or change our environment. This is going to be heavy note-taking time because you're about to share what I believe is one of the most interesting parts of your story. You feel a call on your life and you end up becoming the president and CEO of the Global Leadership Network. And I don't want to spoil the story. You talk about this sort of Jim Collins mantra, and I want you to kind of take our listeners into this transition from LCBC to Global Leadership Network. This is fascinating. Excited for our listeners to hear about this transition.
So Jordan, probably I'm in my mid 50s and I'm thinking that I'm going to go on at LCBC for the rest of my time and serving well into my 70s or who knows how old, and had opportunity to sit down in a small group of about 15 people with Jim Collins, the Good to Great author and other books. And as I'm sitting with him, he's going through his levels of leadership. He's got 5 levels, level 5 being the highest. And I'm sure all of us around the table, but at least me, I'm thinking, will I ever be? Can I be a level 5 leader? Am I a level 5 leader? And as he's talking, he makes the comment, he says, you'll never be a level 5 leader until you've actually left your organization. And after you left, it's better with you gone than with you there. And that just kind of messed with my head and shaped then the rest of my time at LCBC, because in my mind, we all play the scenarios. And when I leave, everybody's going to be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and they're going to be so upset that I'm gone, and the organization is going to struggle without me. And Collins just said, if that's the case, you're a terrible leader. You did not set the organization up well after you were gone. And so that started me on this journey of saying, what do I need to do to make sure LCBC is better when I'm gone than when I'm there? And so I laid out and actually mapped out about a 10 to 12 year plan and looked at our finances and said, where are we financially and what do I need to do to make sure that the church is strong and has this war chest when I move on? Where are we structurally? How do I need to change the staff around, the structures, make sure everything is simple and easy to operate? to even my successor. And so began to look at who might take my place. We had a small team of 4 of us that were considered the succession team. And so I met with them twice a year for 12 years. And I brought who I thought should be my successor to this group. His name was Jason. And I said, I think Jason's the guy. And they said, there's no way that Jason is the guy. And so I said, well, why not? What are the shortcomings? And so they'd named 4 or 5 of them. And it was education, it was experience, it was business acumen and things like that. And so I said, okay, well, let's go to work on all those 5 things. And so we got Jason more education. We did more work on his communication skills and did everything to work on those 5 areas. So 6 years later, I bring Jason's name back to them. And they said, yeah, he's the guy. He would be perfect to step into this role. And so then it was a matter of determining what's the right time to make this transition. And like I said, it was a 10 to 12 year plan. I also didn't want my decision of when to step out when it was most comfortable for me. And a mistake that I see pastors make, I don't know how it works in the business world, but pastors oftentimes will make a decision based on when it's easiest or best for them to step out of a role. And so I'll hear people say, well, when my kids graduate from college or when I do this or that. And I just kind of listen and go, so man, is your son or daughter's success in college and ability to finish in 4 years or 5 years or whatever, is that really what's best for the church, or is that what's best for you? And so I wanted to say what's best for the organization and not what's best for me. But I was still concerned about myself, and so I had to work through some plans for myself. But there was a huge level of trust between Jason, who was going to take my place, and me. And so I had to trust him that he wasn't going to bail out, go somewhere else. He had to trust me that I wasn't going to stay much longer than I had initially said. And so we mapped out that 10 or 12 year plan. I sat down with Jason pretty early in that plan and said, here's what I think could happen if we stick with this. And so as we moved along, came to a point where it felt like it was right for the church. It was right for Jason. My wife would say, oh, it's not right for you. You used to have 4 or 5 years you can give. Why are you doing that this early? I said, I think it's right for the church. I need to go ahead and make this change. And so stepped out, knew that I was going to work on this organization called The Advantage. And that was going to take some of my time, but wasn't sure that it was going to really be full-time for me, but didn't know what else I was going to do. And oftentimes, Jordan, the advice that we're given is know what you're going to do before you make that transition. And I think that's good. But the problem with that, and I sat down with our board 6 or 7 years before I stepped out and said, I can either go to work on now what I'm going to do when I step away from LCBC, and I can start building this other career besides LCBC, or I can stay focused totally on LCBC. I just need you guys to ensure that you're going to take care of me for several years after so that then I can build something. But I want to keep my eyes totally on LCBC until I step away. And so they were willing to do that and get it in writing, have it on paper, and make sure that it's all drawn out. Don't just go on a handshake. But we had legal documents that kind of set that out. And so kind of moved forward until we thought, okay, this is the right time to make the change. And what's funny, Jordan, about 3 months after I stepped away from LCBC, Ruth, my wife, at one point came to me and she said, David, you need to find something else to lead. And then she looked at me and said, and it's not me. And apparently I was giving her more advice and direction around the house than she was looking for. And she was telling me, you need to go find somebody else to lead and boss around. So about that same time, the Global Leadership Network was going through a leadership transition. And I'd been on the board for about 6 years. Had been a part of the summit for many, many years. And so they asked me to step into the role, and it was a perfect fit for me. And it's been a great thing. And I've been there now for about 14 months and thoroughly enjoying it.
What an amazing example of succession planning done well, right? And a roadmap to, hey, this can work, and you can plan, years in advance. I want to point out a couple of things. I spent a lot of time with John Maxwell, and John's been so generous and gracious to me and just teaching and coaching, and we do a lot with Maxwell Leadership. And one of the things that John's really passionate about when it comes to succession planning that you modeled, David, I think with LCBC, is the leader has to step away when they're still running in full stride. So they're still at the top of their game. They're still, active and proactive and giving the organization everything they have. Because to your point, I think so many times there's a deadline that's further out than it should be. And oftentimes it's totally based on the leader. It's not what's best for the organization, and they go too long. And in your case, it was like, hey, I could continue to go, but I need to step away because this is what's best for Jason. This is what's best for the organization. So I commend you on that. I also think about this idea of trust, and the relationship that you and Jason shared and still share. And just, how you both had to trust each other in that process. So again, we could probably do a podcast episode on succession planning. I'm sure there's multiple lessons there that I know you're unpacking today and you're at work in the Advantage, which I want to go to next. But just real quick, before we go to the Advantage, Global Leadership Network, you have two of the biggest days of your year right around the corner. Matter of fact, when our listeners hear this, they'll be a week out. So there's still time to join in on the summit. But talk to us about the Global Leadership Summit for those who aren't as familiar, or even for those who are familiar but want to know what to expect this year. David, you mind just talking a little bit about the Global Leadership Summit?
Yeah, happy to. Two things I want to say real quick about succession before I forget, though, Jordan, if you don't mind if I go back to that. One is I just tell people the more time you plan, the further ahead you plan, the better your succession and the transition is going to go. And I'll listen to guys that, next year, I think I'm going to step away, or, in 2 years. And 2 years is okay, but man, if you could do it 5 or 6 years, and I look at our situation, had I gone 2 years and a year, 2 years out, then Jason, who took my place and is doing a great job, no way he would have been my replacement, because the board would have said he's not ready yet, or he wouldn't have waited around for me to make the transition, because he could have gone somewhere else as well. So I think time is your best friend or your worst enemy when it comes to transitions that way. And so the earlier you can plan, the better off you're going to be. The other thing I just mentioned is I was encouraged and taught that if you like the direction your organization is going, make the hire internal. If you want to change the direction of your organization, hire externally, because somebody's going to come in from the outside. They may have all the same language, terminology, even beliefs that you do, but they're going to take you a different direction. And so we loved the direction we were going. And so we made the commitment we're going to hire internally. But that's where time helps you develop that person. And I talk to so many pastors or leaders that would say, I don't have somebody like Jason in my organization. And I would say, well, I didn't either when I started this process, but I had to develop Jason and work with him and give him the experiences he needed to be ready. And so odds are the person's in your organization, but you've just got to develop them. And so time is your best friend or your worst enemy. Other thing I'll just say real quick on transitions, the thing that surprised me most, Jordan, were the emotions involved. And so you can have everything written out on paper. What you don't know are the emotions you're going to feel. And, there's everything to just a sense of death almost. And so probably the last 6 months, every time I drive to church, I felt like I was driving to my funeral. And so there's that sense of loss, because for 32 years, this has been our thing. And it happened for Ruth and I. But there's also all these emotions once you do step away. And so this is the dark side for me anyway. It's a sense of pride or entitlement, or am I getting the recognition that I think I deserve? And so, I would watch things be announced of new locations. So now the church has 4 more locations, and it's exciting. And so Jason would announce those, and everybody go, Jason, that's great. And in my head, I'm going, wait a minute, I raised the money for those 4 locations. I planned those 4 locations. I did that, when in reality, it's not about me. And so I've had to confess to God more than ever, Jordan, of just saying, God, I'm so sorry. That's pride creeping up. That's me wanting attention. It's not about me. And so it doesn't matter who kind of did things behind the scenes. What matters is Jesus is being taken to the people. And so I just would say, just be careful with the emotions. And I can understand why a lot of succession plans get blown up. But it's because of emotions, I think, getting out of control and realizing that it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about moving the organization and the mission forward. And so just being real careful with that.
I love the vulnerability and also the awareness to your emotions and how you felt or have been feeling, because it's a total normal human emotion to feel that, right? Regardless of what you grow, whether it's in the corporate world or in the church. I think if your fingerprints are all over something, and have been for the better part of 30 years, there's a natural feeling of ownership and entitlement. And I think for those listening, David said, well, it's all God's anyway. And I think it's easy to feel that way when it's the church, right? Well, yeah, the church belongs to the Lord, but hey, guess what? Everything does. So we believe that in our organization too. And I, there's times where I want to say, well, this is mine, and I built it, and our fingerprints are on it. And I got to remember, hey, God is the giver of all good things. He's blessed us with the talent, and the ability, and the relationships, and the opportunities, and His open doors. And so, to God be the credit. And listen, if you don't know the Lord, He knows you. And there's a lot that we could talk about, I think, just in this vein of just pride and ego and how it can creep up on us when we feel like something is ours or we deserve it. So I appreciate your humility.
Yeah, and Jordan,
sharing,
so oftentimes with succession too, you're talking about legacy. And so legacy, oftentimes we think it's people will remember me. I want them to remember my name and what I did, and that's legacy.
Yes.
One of the speakers, so you ask about the Global Leadership Summit, one of the speakers we have this year, his name is Dan Alawagbi, and his whole premise is that in 2 generations, nobody's going to know your name. And so you even think through your family in 2 generations. Do you know your great-grandparents' names? Do you know anything about them? And he said, we've got 2 generations and our name for most people will be gone. And so then you try to think through, so it's not my name that's going to be remembered, but what are the things that I can instill in others that will be passed on from generation to generation? And so even now, as I sit and I listen to Jason preach, and I still attend LCBC, and so I'll listen to him talk, and sometimes, again, my emotions will stir up and go, wait a minute, I taught you that. I said that phrase. That's my phrase. And I'll walk away, and first I'll say, okay, God, it's not about me. But then I think, what more would I want than for things that I taught him, for him to be repeating and saying, and it's great that he owns them. And now he's going to say them for the next 20 years. Hopefully somebody else will pick it up from him. And so all of a sudden, my legacy is that things that I taught him are going on for 2 or 3 or 4 generations. So legacy, is it about a person and my name, or is it about the things that I can instill in others and values? And so you ask about the summit, and I'll just say a couple of things real quick, Jordan. I think the summit, the Global Leadership Summit, is really, and again, selfishly, I think it's the premier leadership event in really the world. We have about 300,000 people each year that will participate in the summit. About 200,000 of those are international. And we have a faculty of about 15 speakers. So this year it's Coach K, if you're in the sports world, Marcus Buckingham, Arthur Brooks, who's a Harvard professor. So typically we try to find 3 different lanes that people are in that we'll have speak at the summit. There are those that are actually leading. And so Craig Rochelle leading Life Church, a church of about 100,000 people showing up every weekend, just mind-boggling what they're doing. So Craig speaks. Then you've got thought leaders that are maybe, so Amy Edmondson is also a Harvard professor. She actually is going to be speaking on failure. And Jordan, I've been told for years that if you're not failing often, you're not failing enough, you're not being creative enough. And she's kind of questioning that and saying, well, you need to fail, but stupid failure, there's no room for that. And so it's not a matter of just failing a lot. She's just saying be wise and learn from your failures. And so maybe limit the number of failures you have. So she's talking that way. Arthur Brooks is just unity in the midst of all this discord that's around us. And so here's a Harvard professor that happens to be a Christian, and somehow he's able to thrive in that environment at Harvard and in the world. So you've got him speaking to a Kendra Hall, who her whole thing is on stories and telling stories. And so any of us, I know you speak and speak very well, but stories are part of what make our communication successful. And she's talking about, here's how to pull stories out of your situation. Here's how to tell stories in a way that'll be helpful. And so all these people that I think help us lead and lead well. So the summit is this collection of business people, CEOs, but first time just stepping into the business community, to church leaders, to nonprofits, stepping into a circle and saying, how can we each elevate our leadership lid so that we can be stronger, better leaders? And for us as an organization, ultimately, it's so that more people can be introduced to Jesus, is what we say.
Well, I just commend you on the work that you and your team are doing on putting together the summit. I mean, what an undertaking, what a movement, what a massive amount of just energy and time that goes into this mission of more people hearing about Jesus, but really doing it in an attractive, intriguing way where so many leaders, regardless of faith background or industry, can learn and grow together. I want to point this out too, David, that when I talk to peers, friends, partners who speak at the summit, they always talk about how honored they are. Like, man, that was such an honor to be a part of what David and his team are doing, because it is broadcast to truly the world. I mean, it's a global event. And this message that people are sharing is going out to the ends of the earth. And so do you want to talk just real quick about how people can join? We'll be sure to put the link in the show notes, but where do people go to find out about Global Leadership Summit? And how do they join here next week? Yeah,
it's just globalleadership.org, and you can go to our website, find out where the locations are. It's broadcast from Chicago, Willow Creek Community Church. We're sold out and have been for a while there. It's a great environment there, but there's another 470 locations in the United States, another 700 locations internationally that people can participate in. And what I would just say, Jordan, for the summit, for years, I was always taught, and I've said in meeting after meeting of people saying, you've got to develop this leadership pipeline. And so I was always pulling my hair out trying to figure out, how do I develop this leadership pipeline? And even though I've heard people talk about it for years, I've never seen anybody succeed with it. Maybe in a sports environment where you've got a second, third teamer waiting behind the first stringer. But at least in our case, we didn't have the funds to have a second or third teamer waiting to step in. And so I've never been able to just open the spigot and a leader pops out and we're ready to go. Instead, I think what the summit does and what we've landed on is it's creating a pool of leaders. And if I can take the leaders that are in my church, continue to elevate their game, then when I need a leader, I don't open a spigot, but I've got this pool of people that are there with lots of different leadership skills and experiences. And then I can pull somebody out and say, man, I think this person's ready to step into this environment. So it's more of a pool of leadership than a spigot of leaders. And I think the summit is great at doing that for organizations.
Great leadership model. God continues to amazing things with the Global Leadership Summit. Can't wait to see what he does this year. I'll be watching, participating. Again, kudos. I know that just the tremendous work and energy that goes into pulling that off. And did you say 700 locations? Did I get that right? 700
locations internationally, another 470 in the United States. So
just incredible. Praise God. And again, congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, I want to land this plane. Just tell us a little bit about your work today. I'm still trying to figure out how you're keeping this all together, David. I don't fully understand it. We need to have another conversation. You also run an organization called The Advantage. And I think the work you're doing in that space is fascinating. Could you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing there? And if people want to reach out or know more, also where can they find out about your work in The Advantage?
So LCBC had this desire probably 10 years ago to say, how do we impact the state of Pennsylvania, and feeling like God placed us in Pennsylvania. And initially, we probably arrogantly thought that means LCBC locations all across the state of Pennsylvania. And it may still mean lots more LCBC locations. But very quickly, we realized we need to work alongside other churches. And so probably 6 years ago or so, I was lying in bed reading my Bible. I wake up earlier than I want, so I had my phone out and I'm just reading through the book of Acts. And in the book of Acts, it describes a man named Apollos. And Apollos was this great leader, describes him in very eloquent terms of being this gifted speaker, great debater of the faith, and going on and on about him. And as I'm reading it, again, in my mind, I'm going, oh, am I anything like Apollos? And I came to the conclusion, I'm nothing like Apollos. And I wish I were, but I'm not like him. And then all of a sudden, there's one descriptor at the end of the passage that just said he was a great advantage or benefit to every person that he came in contact with. And as I read that phrase, I just thought, you know what? That's what I want to be. And that's where I could be because of my experience and things that I've been able to be a part of. I could be an advantage. I want to be an advantage specifically to pastors, I just said. So we started this organization called The Advantage, saying we just want to be able to come alongside and be an advantage to other churches, specifically in Pennsylvania. Initially, we thought, let's reach out to every church in Pennsylvania. And then we found out there's like 20,000 churches in Pennsylvania. So we said, that's probably not realistic. So then we reached out to the 80 largest churches in Pennsylvania, invited them. I actually sat down, called them personally, did Zoom calls, met with them individually, said, would you meet with us for a day to talk about how we can all impact Pennsylvania? 74 of them came to that day. Then when we were together for that day, we said, would you want to meet with us in cohorts twice a year just to talk about how we can all elevate our game so that then we can introduce more people to Jesus? 65 of those 74 took us up on that. So now we've got the 65. Their only skin in the game, their commitment is they will in turn mentor 10 other churches or pastors. So that 65 right now is in the process of going to 650 churches or pastors in Pennsylvania. We feel like doing that, we can actually see more and more people come to know Jesus. We can impact the state of Pennsylvania that way. So that's kind of the plan. We think that could happen in states all across the country, not necessarily with us doing it, but it's a real easy model and just a way to impact others. So that's what we do with The Advantage, and it's a lot of fun. We love doing that.
Well, you are an advantage to any organization, a group of people. That just is shown over and over again in your leadership journey, David.
Oh,
and you were an advantage to us today, to our listeners. So I just want to say thanks for investing the time and the energy. And I just want to speak this over you before we wrap up. As I'm listening to you talk, the verse that kept hitting me, or the story that kept hitting me from the book of Matthew, is when the disciples are asking, Jesus, who's the greatest? Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus grabs the child and it says, places the child among them and says, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like this child, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And the message from Jesus to the disciples is just one of humility and really of submission, right? Like, hey, your life apart from me, apart from, the divine power of the Lord is really nothing. You don't have power without me. And I think you've modeled that in your leadership journey, David. There's a yielding in your heart and in your spirit to what the Lord is doing in your life. And I think he's blessed that. And I love that you're still acknowledging the shortcomings and even being transparent about, gosh, I still have these feelings and I'm still working that out and I haven't arrived. None of us arrive.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're willing to point that out, be vulnerable about it, transparent about it, lead with humility, and fight for that. I think that's been a hallmark trait of your leadership journey. I think God has honored that. And I'm just excited to see what he does through your leadership moving forward. Can't wait to join in on the summit. Continue to stay connected and just so encouraged by this conversation today, my friends. So thanks for being the advantage to all of us over the last hour or so. It was a true joy.
Yeah, Jordan, thank you. It's a privilege for me to be a part of it and excited about what you're doing. It's fun to see just your organization growing, the impact that you're making on so many lives. So thank you for what you're doing as well.
Well, I look forward to staying connected for, long time to come. So. Be well. Good luck on the summit. We'll be praying. And again, look forward to connected again real soon.
Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate it very much.
This has been another episode of the Growth Over Goals podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Montgomery. Thank you for listening. Thanks for being here. If you found any value in this episode, I would love it if you would rate, review, subscribe to this podcast in an effort that we might move our mission of impact forward. I also want to say thank you to our producers, John Choate and James Roth of Storyline Multimedia, for all of the work that they do behind the scenes to make this podcast go. Be well, be great. Have a wonderful day.